My name is Caleb Winslow, and if I told you everything I gave up for my future, you'd probably think I was exaggerating. But trust me, I'm not. I don't have the luxury of dramatizing things real life already did that for me. It started the way these stories usually start, quietly. Not with a crash, not with an explosion, but with a missing number on a college login portal. I'd just been accepted to NYU's School of Law. I still remember the feeling, sweaty palms, a thumping chest, and that quiet disbelief you get when you realize something you thought was impossible just became real. I got in. I actually got in. But when I went to access the financial aid breakdown and the tab that should have confirmed the full scholarship and supplement from the Winslow Education Fund, it was empty. No grants, no external support. Just a tuition number so high, I felt like throwing up. At first, I assumed it was a glitch. I called the financial office. They double-checked. You don't have any funds dispersed under the Winslow name. The woman said gently, like she was breaking the news about a pet dying. I blinked. There's been a mistake. That fund, my grandparents set it up. It's been there since I was 7. Silence. Then she said, "You might want to speak to your parents." I did. I wish I hadn't. My dad laughed, first one of those nervous chuckles that people do when they've already decided how this story will be spun. "Oh, that fun," he said, waving his hand like it was just a Christmas bonus. We had to use that years ago. Emergencies. What emergencies? I asked. My voice wasn't shaking yet. It should have been. He didn't answer right away. My mom jumped in. "Your dad lost his job for a few months during the 2020 layoffs. Remember that?" "Yeah," I said slowly. I also remember the photos from Cabo that year. Her smile froze. We needed a break. I didn't say anything else. I just stared. I think a part of me had always known deep down that they were reckless. But stealing my future, my education, that was new. That was war. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. So I opened up their Facebook profiles. You know, the ones filtered photos, hashtags about grateful and blessed. And sure enough, there it all was. A 7-country cruise across Europe, 5-star resorts, a wine tasting in Santorini. My college fund wore linen shirts and held champagne flutes. The deeper I went, the worse it got. They hadn't just spent the money. They lived off it. Designer shoes in Milan, helicopter rides in New Zealand, birthday dinners at places I couldn't pronounce. But what hit hardest? There were no pictures of me. No, "We're so proud of Caleb." No mention of my graduation or even my acceptance letter. I was just missing. That's when something broke inside me. See, I've always been patient. I don't scream. I don't throw things. But what I do is remember every detail. And when it came to this betrayal, I wasn't going to forget a damn thing. That night, I started a folder. I called it Justice. Inside, I began saving screenshots, bank account posts, timeline gaps, photos, anything that could be useful. Because here's what they didn't know. I wasn't just a future law student. I was angry. And anger, when paired with strategy, is a dangerous thing. Trust me, you'll regret skipping this part. So before you sit back and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel, but only if you really like what I have to say here. Now get in the mood to listen to this story, because it might be the ultimate sweet revenge. I named the next folder Evidence, not memories, not vacation pics. Evidence. It was the only way I could make sense of what I was about to do. See, when your parents betray you, not in some accidental forget to pick you up way, but in a cold, calculated, "We chose Santorini over your education" kind of way. You stop seeing them as parents. You start seeing them as defendants. And that's what I did. I studied those cruise photos like they were exhibits. I zoomed in on backgrounds, hotel receipts left out on tables, screenshots of Instagram stories showing timestamps and tagged locations. There were matching bank statements, too. My father, not as digitally literate as he liked to think, had uploaded their joint tax documents into a shared drive years ago. He'd forgotten to revoke access. And there it was, line by line, the path of the stolen money. Wire transfers from the college account into a personal checking account. Large ATM withdrawals on islands with names that sounded like spells. Overdraft fees, then mysterious deposits from a Winslow reserve. That was the kicker. They actually named the account after me, or after the original trust. Winslow Reserve, as if it were some hedge fund, and not the educational lifeline my grandparents had left me. By the time I hit the third night of research, I was exhausted, but something else had begun to take shape. This wasn't just selfishness. This was financial fraud, possibly criminal, and definitely civil. But I didn't know how to proceed. I mean, who do you sue when the defendants also know your social security number and gave you your last flu shot? The idea felt unnatural until I met Rachel. Rachel worked at the nonprofit law center where I had picked up some part-time research work. She was sharp, maybe too sharp. She had this calm way of looking through people without ever needing to raise her voice. Think high-functioning introvert mixed with corporate assassin. One afternoon, while reviewing a client's property inheritance mess, she asked me why I'd been so jumpy lately. I told her the barest bones of it. Parents spent my fund, used it on vacations, said nothing. She raised her eyebrows. Wait, this was a trust. Kind of a dedicated account my grandparents created when I was 7, college only. Did they designate it as an irrevocable education trust? I blinked. I don't know. She reached for her phone. Get the original paperwork. And Caleb, yeah, if they did what I think they did, you may have a case. That moment, that's when the tide started to turn. Because until then, I thought I was just a victim of emotional betrayal. But now I was potentially the plaintiff in a case of misuse of funds and intentional infliction of emotional distress. I started sleeping with my laptop open. I dug through old shoeboxes, scanned signed birthday cards that mentioned the fund-recorded voicemails, and even found an email my dad had sent to his brother titled, "Using the boys' fund for this trip." He thought he was joking. He wasn't. By the end of the month, I had over 400 pages of documentation. Rachel connected me with a litigation associate who'd handled a similar intra-family fraud case. His name was Mark, and unlike Rachel, he didn't try to hide his excitement. "This is twisted," he said, flipping through the pages. "But you've got receipts, and that's what makes a difference." I asked the question that had been haunting me. "Is it wrong to sue them?" Mark didn't smile. "Morality and legality don't always dance to the same music, Caleb. If they stole your car, you'd report it. But they stole something more valuable, your future." He paused. "You sure you want to do this?" I didn't answer right away. I just nodded. Because when someone steals from you and laughs in your face, you don't just get angry. You get strategic. We filed a claim 2 weeks later. The official charges: breach of fiduciary duty, conversion of educational trust funds, emotional distress. My parents were served the documents on a Monday morning. I wasn't there when it happened, but I got a text from my mom at 9:49. "How could you do this to us?" No greeting, no apology, just an accusation. I didn't respond, not because I didn't have words, but because for the first time in my life, I wanted my actions to speak louder than anything I could text. That night, I went out for a run, my first real run in months. It was cold, my lungs burned, but every step felt like I was shaking loose. The shame, the doubt, the heartbreak that had been wrapped around me like a weighted blanket. They didn't own me anymore. And the best part, they were about to find out what that really meant. They say the legal system moves slowly. That's true. Unless the defendants are your parents, and the lawsuit is making your extended family gossip like it's Christmas dinner every day. The news spread faster than I expected. By the end of the week, I was getting side eyes from my cousin Jason and passive-aggressive texts from my Aunt Laurel. Everyone had an opinion, and none of them had bothered to ask what happened before deciding I was the villain. But I didn't care, because while they whispered I was working, the first pre-trial hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out. In the meantime, Mark and I were busy finalizing exhibits. My evidence folder had exploded: calendars of transactions, social media timelines, emails, even an accidental Venmo payment my dad made to a luxury cruise concierge labeled "From Caleb's Fund." That emoji was going to haunt them. The legal claim itself was simple, but layered. The fund had technically been a restricted educational account established by my grandparents. While not a formal trust, it still bore a documented intention. The stipulation had been clearly stated in the founding paperwork. The money was to be used solely for my post-secondary education. Any deviation without my written consent was a violation. Mark was brilliant. He dug deep into something called constructive fraud. When someone uses a position of confidence to deceive even without overt malicious intent. It was a perfect fit, but we didn't stop there. He added intentional infliction of emotional distress, backed by their gaslighting texts and the strategic withholding of information about my college future, which they claimed was an overreaction. And that's when I found it, the photo. I don't know how I missed it before. It was buried in my mom's tagged Facebook photos from a friend of hers named Angela. Someone I hadn't even met. The caption read, "Great week in Dubai with the Winslows. Can't believe you pulled it off with college bills and all." It was posted a month before I'd received my NYU acceptance. Angela had 412 followers. One of them was a reporter. We didn't leak anything. We didn't have to. The story made it to a mid-sized legal blog as a curious case of inter-family misappropriation. And then Reddit picked it up. Within days, people started messaging me, asking if I was that kid whose parents blew his future on margaritas in Mexico. The internet had spoken, and oddly, most people were on my side. That didn't stop my parents from retaliating. They filed a motion to dismiss, claiming I'd known the money was gone for years, and that I'd approved the vacation as a family experience. They said I was bitter because I hadn't gotten into my first-choice school. I had. They even tried to paint me as mentally unstable. Mark wasn't worried. "They're overreaching," he said. That's desperation. Still, the damage was real. My phone started buzzing with unknown numbers. Family friends calling to offer unsolicited advice, suggesting I drop the case, make peace, stop tearing the family apart. I wanted to scream. I didn't. I documented everything. Every voicemail, every text, every vague threat. I handed them all over to Mark, and he smiled like a man collecting gold coins in a video game. "You're making this easy," he said. But it wasn't easy. Emotionally, I was a wreck. There were nights I stared at my bedroom ceiling, wondering if I was doing the right thing. Not legally. Morally, they were still my parents. They raised me, fed me, sat through piano recitals, took me to the ER when I broke my ankle. But that same ankle, it had walked me straight into their betrayal. And now it was standing in court against them. One morning, I received an email from my grandfather's former attorney. He'd heard about the case through a retired colleague and reached out to offer something I never knew existed. A notarized letter from my grandfather outlining his explicit wishes for the college fund. It was dated 6 months before he passed. It read, "This fund is for Caleb Winslow, and only for him. Not a cruise, not furniture, not a vacation. Education is his right." I cried when I read that, because for the first time in months, I felt less alone. The letter was admissible as supporting evidence, and it obliterated their claim that the fund had been casual or flexible. The next week, we had our first court appearance. It wasn't a full trial, just a pre-trial session where the judge reviewed evidence and arguments for proceeding. My parents were there. They didn't look at me. My dad wore a navy suit 2 sizes too tight. Maybe it was old. Maybe he was pretending to shrink back into someone honorable. My mom had her hair tied back in the same bun she wore to my high school graduation. I wondered if she remembered that day. The judge, a tall woman with reading glasses, and the vocal tone of someone who dealt with liars for 3 decades, looked over our submission packet. She read the letter aloud. My mom's face crumpled. My dad looked down, and then the judge said the words, "I'll never forget. There is sufficient merit to proceed. This case will move forward." I felt like I could breathe again. Outside the courtroom, my mom finally looked at me. "You're doing this to punish us." "No," I said. "I'm doing this to protect myself." That night, I added one more folder. It was called Victory in Progress. I felt like someone worth fighting for. The court recessed for the weekend, and in those 2 days, my world changed more than I expected. I hadn't told many people about the trial, not really. But after my testimony, a court sketch artist who occasionally freelanced for a local blog posted an image of the hearing. Me on the witness stand, my hands folded in front of me, head slightly bowed. The caption just read, "Son sues parents after they spend his future quiet fire in the courtroom." That sketch went viral. By Monday morning, my inbox was full. Some hate, mostly support. A law professor from Boston wrote to say my case would be taught in one of her ethics lectures. A stranger from Ohio sent me a long message about how her father spent her wedding fund on a motorcycle. A YouTuber even asked if I'd agree to an interview. I didn't respond to any of them. Not because I didn't appreciate it, but because I wasn't done. Not yet. Back in court, my parents shifted tactics again. They brought in a family psychologist, not someone I'd ever spoken to. Just a man in a blazer who said, "It's not uncommon for children of divorce to externalize blame when feeling academically inadequate." Divorce. My parents weren't even divorced. I leaned over to Mark. "Where did they find this guy?" "He's from their church," he whispered back. "They paid him. Don't worry, he'll fall apart and cross." And he did. Mark calmly asked him about the DSM criteria for narcissistic abuse, whether he had reviewed my journals or spoken to me before testifying. The man admitted he hadn't. The judge raised her eyebrows. "So you're offering a psychological evaluation of someone you've never met?" Yes, based on statements and behavior. Statements provided by the defendants. Yes. She made a note. That was the end of that. But my parents weren't done. They submitted a series of emails I'd sent in high school normal teenage venting, where I called them overbearing, controlling, and, in one case, financially immature. I almost laughed. If they thought that was damaging, they should have read my private diary. But it worked against them, because every time they tried to prove I was difficult, they only emphasized the emotional climate I grew up in, one where speaking up was dangerous and disagreement was betrayal. Then came the cross-examination of my mother. Mark didn't attack her. He didn't need to. He simply asked questions. "Did you understand that the Winslow Reserve was meant exclusively for your son's education?" I thought we'd pay it back eventually. "Was there a written repayment plan?" "No." "Did you inform Caleb in writing that you had used the funds?" We didn't want to upset him. "Do you now believe it was wrong?" Long pause. "I believe he's overreacting." Mark let the silence stretch. "Then, you believe using your son's future without consent and hiding it for years is an overreaction?" She didn't answer. Mark thanked her and sat down. It was quiet in the courtroom, thick, like the air had turned into something you could cut with a knife. And then the judge spoke. "I'll deliver my decision in 5 days. You'll be notified." And that was it. The trial ended not with applause or screaming, but with a gentle gavel tap and the sound of papers being shuffled. Outside the courtroom, I passed my parents without a word. My mom looked away. My dad stared at the floor like it owed him something. I walked past them like a stranger, because that's what they'd become. The next 5 days were the longest of my life. I couldn't focus. I couldn't read. I couldn't eat without checking my email every 10 minutes, like the verdict might arrive over lunch. Mark stayed calm. "We did everything right," he kept saying. "She saw the evidence. The facts are on your side." But it didn't feel that way, because this wasn't just about facts. This was about everything. Then, on the morning of the 5th day, it came. A simple email with the subject line, "Winslow v. Winslow decision filed." My hands were shaking as I opened it. I read it once, then again, and I sat back in my chair with tears in my eyes. We won. The judge had ruled that my parents' actions constituted a breach of fiduciary duty, and that their intentional misappropriation of designated education funds combined with deceptive emotional manipulation met the burden of intentional infliction of emotional distress. She ordered full financial restitution, and then something else, an additional $75,000 in non-economic damages. It wasn't just about the money. It was that someone with power and authority, had looked at what happened to me and said, "This matters." I forwarded the email to Mark. His response was 3 words: "You earned this." That night, I went for another run. The air was cold. The streets were empty. But in my chest, it felt like spring. Winning sounds cleaner than it feels. You think it'll be fireworks, champagne, maybe a few nights of uninterrupted sleep. But what it actually feels like, quiet, uneasy, like you've survived something that hasn't quite finished hurting yet. The day after the verdict, I got a check in the mail. Not from my parents, of course not. It was from the court's escrow office, a partial release of the restitution amount. The rest would be handled over the next year in scheduled payments monitored by the court. I held that envelope in my hand for 20 minutes before opening it. I didn't cry. I didn't laugh. I just exhaled. It felt like I'd been holding my breath for years. With the restitution, I could finally move forward. I enrolled officially for the fall term at NYU, paid my first tuition installment in full. Even got myself a second-hand MacBook Pro from Craigslist without worrying about overdrafting my account. I wasn't rich, but I was free, mostly. Because here's the thing, they don't tell you about getting justice. It doesn't fix what broke. It doesn't rewind the moments where you felt worthless. It doesn't restore the look in your mother's eyes when she called you ungrateful, or the silence that your father used like a weapon. But it does give you a foundation, and for me, that was enough. I moved out of stud a few weeks later into a one-bedroom apartment in a building with way too many stairs and questionable water pressure, but it was mine, paid for by me. Not guilt, not manipulation, not stolen promises, just me. And the day I moved in, I did something I never thought I'd do. I called my parents. I didn't want an apology anymore. I didn't even expect one. I just needed to say what hadn't been said. The phone rang twice. My mom answered. She didn't say hello. Just, I saw the court decision. I nodded even though she couldn't see. I know. Silence. Then she said, "You really think you were that hurt?" It wasn't said with venom, just exhaustion. Like she genuinely didn't understand. I don't think I said quietly, "I know." Another pause. I guess we don't see it the same way. No, I agreed. We don't. Then I said something I'd rehearsed 100 times in the mirror, but never got quite right until that moment. I didn't sue you to punish you. I sued you because I had to choose between my future and your denial. And I chose me. And I hung up, not out of anger, but closure. She hasn't called since. Neither has my dad. And that's okay, because I've learned something through all of this. Not all parents are safe just because they're parents. Love isn't unconditional when it's laced with debt. Family doesn't mean loyalty if it means sacrificing yourself to maintain it. Some people call that selfish. I call it survival. A month later, I started school. Law classes hit harder when you've lived through a case of your own. I sat in torts class, reading through cases about emotional damages, breach of duty, and fiduciary violations. And I didn't just memorize them. I felt them. I knew what it was like to be on the other side of that courtroom glass. And maybe that's why I started mentoring. There were other students like me, ones who were the first in their families to go to college, ones who'd been lied to, let down, silenced. I told them everything. Not just how to file a complaint, but how to survive the silence afterward. How to build something new out of what was broken. One girl, I'll call her Sam, was trying to escape a financially abusive stepfather who drained her savings under her name. I helped her document the transfers, find legal aid, write the affidavit. She won her case. We celebrated with bad pizza and shared silence, because sometimes healing doesn't come with fanfare. Sometimes it just means sleeping through the night without your heart racing. The last time I thought about the fund was a rainy Tuesday. I was organizing my files, cleaning out old folders, and there it was, the one I'd labeled Justice. I hovered my mouse over it, hand trembling slightly. Then I moved it, not to trash, but to archive, because I didn't need it anymore. I had something better, a future they couldn't take. I never thought I'd get used to peace. At first, it felt like something was missing, like I was forgetting to brace for impact. My body was still tuned to the frequency of betrayal, expecting the next emotional landmine every time my phone rang or my email pinged. But days passed, then weeks, and nothing exploded. I settled into school. It wasn't easy, law never is, but it felt right. Like the kind of hard that builds you, not breaks you. Still shadows linger. The courtroom doesn't close the emotional tab, even after the gavel falls. Sometimes I'd catch myself flinching when classmates mentioned their parents how they were visiting for the weekend, or sending care packages, or helping with rent. I'd nod and smile and then walk away, like it didn't bother me. But it did. Because no matter how right you are, there's still grief in realizing your family chose their comfort over your future. It's a kind of mourning no funeral prepares you for. That's when therapy entered the picture. NYU offered free student counseling, and at first, I only signed up to fulfill a credit requirement for an ethics class. But one session turned into 3, then 10, and slowly I learned something no judge could teach me. Healing doesn't ask for proof. It just asks for permission. We talked about boundaries, about the guilt I still carried, about how winning hadn't erased the younger version of me, the one who cried in silence, afraid to confront the people who bought vacation wine with his college savings. And eventually I let that version of myself go. Or maybe I just held his hand a little more gently. One day after class, I passed by a bookstore with a display that stopped me cold. It was a memoir by a well-known attorney titled, "Justice Starts at Home." I walked in and bought it, not because I needed legal advice, because I wanted to remember. Remember that justice isn't some sweeping dramatic scene in a movie. Sometimes it's a kid in a too-small courtroom telling the truth while his parents shift uncomfortably in their chairs. Sometimes it's not a roar. It's a whisper that refuses to go unheard. By the end of the semester, something unexpected happened. Mark, the attorney who helped me win my case, called with an offer. "There's a summer clerk position open at our firm," he said. "It's not glamorous. Research scanning, prepping briefs. But you'd be good at it." I didn't even hesitate. "Yes," I said. "Absolutely." He laughed. "Good." I told them you were sharp and that you don't quit. When I showed up for the first day, they gave me a badge with my name on it. Caleb Winslow, legal intern. I stared at it for a long time, not because of the title, but because it was mine. No lies, no theft, no strings attached, just me, earning every inch of it. Later that week, we had a case involving a trust violation, a father who'd spent his daughter's fund on crypto without telling her. During the intake, the girl sat across from me. She looked about 19, wearing a hoodie too big and a backpack that slumped like it carried more weight than books. She didn't say much, just stared at the table. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "I don't want to cause trouble." I looked at her for a long second before replying. "You're not causing trouble," I said. "You're protecting your future." She nodded slowly, tears welling in her eyes, and I realized in that moment that maybe the best revenge isn't about payback. Maybe it's about becoming the person you needed when you were hurting. I walked her through her options, gave her a folder, printed the intake documents. When she left, she whispered, "Thank you." I didn't say you're welcome. I said you're not alone. Because now, she wasn't, and neither was I. Summer bled into fall before I noticed the days getting shorter. I was knee-deep in briefs, case law, and endless cups of vending machine coffee. At the firm, I was no longer the kid who sued his parents. I was just Caleb, the intern who stayed late and flagged obscure statutes other clerks missed. The strange thing about peace is that it's not loud. It's quiet mornings. It's walking down the street and not flinching when a car honks. It's realizing you haven't thought about the worst thing that ever happened to you in over a week. And when you do, it doesn't crush you anymore. It just sits there, like a scar, visible but not painful. Then, one Thursday evening, I got a message that took the air out of my lungs. It was from my cousin Jason. We hadn't spoken in almost 2 years. Not since the lawsuit tore through the family like a thunderclap, leaving everyone to pick sides and hide behind silence. His message said, "Hey, I saw your story on that podcast. I was wrong to judge you. Can we talk?" My first instinct. Delete it. The second, reply with venom. But my third, that voice, the one that had grown smarter and quieter since everything fell apart, told me to wait. So I did a day, then another. Then finally I messaged back. "Sure. Just talk. No family drama. Just you and me." We met at a coffee shop near campus. He looked older, thinner, like regret had been living in his ribs for a while now. I didn't know everything he said, barely above a whisper. "Your mom told us you were just bitter, that you'd failed out, that you were trying to embarrass them." I stared at my coffee. That tracks. I believed her. I shouldn't have, You weren't the only one. He nodded. "I'm sorry, Caleb. I didn't know how much they took from you." I took a long sip, then looked at him squarely. "You know, now." He nodded again, slower this time. And for the first time in years, I felt the weight of the past shift just slightly like a boulder rolling half an inch off my chest. We talked for over an hour. About family, about silence, about what happens when people choose comfort over truth. When we said goodbye, he gripped my shoulder and said, "I'm proud of you." I didn't say anything, because I didn't need to. Later that week, I had a conversation with Rachel, the woman who'd first told me I might have a case, the one who looked through people like they were glass. We ran into each other in the elevator at the firm. "I heard you got through your internship rotation," she said with that half smile she always wore when pretending not to be impressed. I did. "You think you'll stay?" I nodded. "If they'll have me." She nodded back. "They will." The elevator dinged. Before stepping out, she turned and said, "It's not about being a lawyer, Caleb. It's about knowing where the line is and never letting anyone erase it just because they gave birth to you. Then she walked away, and I stood there stunned, because that was the sentence I'd been chasing for months. A few weeks later, I returned to the courtroom. Not for me this time, but for Sam, the girl I'd mentored earlier, the one whose stepfather drained her savings. She was shaking before testifying, hands like leaves in the wind. I squeezed her shoulder and whispered, "You don't have to roar to be heard. Just speak your truth. That's enough." She nodded, eyes glassy but fierce. And when she took the stand, she told the truth about the manipulation, the control, the betrayal. The judge ruled in her favor. Full restitution. Court-ordered protections. I bought her a slice of pie afterward. She barely ate it, just kept saying, "I can't believe I won." I smiled. "You didn't just win," I said. "You reclaimed something." That night, walking back to my apartment, I realized something simple. I hadn't just survived my story. I'd outgrown it. The betrayal would always be there. The missing birthdays. The absence of unconditional love. The holidays that would always feel a little colder. But so would the victory. Not just the legal one. The human one. The moment I said, "I deserve better." And then went out and proved it. By the time winter rolled around, my name started floating through firm halls in new ways. Caleb can take that deposition summary. Ask Winslow. He's already seen case law on that. He's sharp. You'll want him on this. It was subtle, but it meant everything. Respect wasn't something handed to me anymore. It was something I earned. Still, there were moments that caught me off guard. A coworker complaining about how her parents only gave her a partial down payment for her condo. A student who moaned about how hard it was to deal with parental pressure when they wouldn't co-sign her second car loan. I didn't judge. I just nodded. Because once you've been through fire, you learn not to mock people for their burns. But you also learn what real pain looks like. Mine had a paper trail and a courtroom. I never bragged. I never told people, "Hey, I sued my parents and won." But some of them found out. One late evening at the firm, my supervisor pulled me aside. "I read your case," he said plainly. "Didn't realize that was you." I tensed. "Yeah." He studied me for a moment. "You've got grit. The good kind, not the performative stuff. The kind that keeps showing up when most people would crumble." I didn't say anything, because he wasn't done. "You ever thought about advocacy? Family fraud cases? Trust litigation?" I blinked. Honestly, I hadn't thought that far yet. He smiled. "You should. You've got the backbone for it." And just like that, a new path opened, one I never expected. That weekend, I received a certified letter, not from the court, not from my family, from a lawyer representing my mother. She'd filed for early withdrawal on the structured restitution payments, claiming undue hardship and emotional duress caused by the court ruling. In simpler terms, she wanted the judge to reduce what she owed me, to let her off the hook. I stared at the letter for a long time. It wasn't anger I felt. It was grief. Grief that after everything, after all the evidence, all the silence, all the truths laid bare, she still couldn't own it. Mark called me immediately. "We'll respond," he said calmly. "The judge won't grant it. It's not legally viable. But you need to be prepared." "For what?" I asked. "For her to never be the mother you hoped she'd become." That night, I sat on the floor of my apartment with the letter in my hand, and I let the tears come. Because sometimes justice doesn't heal. It just gives you permission to feel the hurt that came before it. But after the tears, stillness, resolve, and the next morning we filed our objection. Weeks passed. The motion was denied. My mother didn't appeal. She just disappeared. No texts, no letters, no more courtroom drama. And slowly I let her go. Not out of anger, but out of mercy. Because carrying someone who refuses to change is like dragging a locked door through your future. It only opens when you leave it behind. In February, I gave a talk at a local high school. They invited law students to speak on career day. And I almost didn't go. But something told me I should. I stood in front of 40 juniors in oversized hoodies and awkward braces and told them about contracts and torts and why words matter more than people realize. Then one kid in the back raised his hand. "What made you want to study law?" It was the first time someone had asked me that so directly, and I didn't flinch. I wanted to learn how to protect people, starting with myself. He nodded slowly, and that was enough. After the talk, a guidance counselor came up to me. That story you told, she said softly, about reclaiming your future. I think a lot of these kids needed to hear it. I smiled. Me too. And as I left the building, something strange happened. For the first time in years, I remembered my grandfather, not just his letter, but his voice, how he always told me, one day you'll know when to stand. And when you do, don't sit back down for anyone. I hadn't sat down since, and I wasn't planning to. Spring brought with it more than just warmer air, and a chance to finally shelve my winter coat. It brought clarity. I wasn't where I thought I'd be when I was 17, dreaming about college and internships and a future where my parents cheered me on from the sidelines. That version of my life was gone, but something better had taken root. One morning, I got an email from NYU student government inviting me to speak on a panel. When family fails, reclaiming your path. I didn't even hesitate. I replied yes within 5 minutes. The day of the event, I walked into the auditorium and immediately spotted the other panelists. One had been kicked out for coming out as gay. Another had survived a cult-like religious upbringing. Every story was different. But we all had one thing in common. We weren't victims anymore. When it was my turn to speak, I took a breath and stepped to the mic. I sued my parents, I said plainly. You could hear the air shift in the room. And I won, I continued. Not just the case, but the right to decide who I am and who I'll never be. I told them the truth about betrayal, about gaslighting, about the way it feels to realize you were just a line item on someone else's budget. But more importantly, I told them what came after. Peace, power, the ability to sit at a table you built with your own hands and say, "This is mine." After the panel, a girl with shaking hands came up to me. She was 19, freshman. Her father had threatened to cut off tuition if she didn't switch majors. "I don't want to be a doctor," she whispered. "I want to write." I looked her in the eye. "Then write," I said, "and if he pulls the money, come find me. I'll help you draft a breach of verbal contract claim, so clean it'll rattle his ego." She laughed through her tears, and something in me healed, because once I was her, and now I was someone people came to for strength. The next week I got a letter in the mail. It wasn't from my parents. It was from my grandfather's old attorney again. Inside was a smaller envelope marked "Personal Effects." I opened it carefully. Inside was a note in my grandfather's handwriting. "For when the world feels too big and too heavy, you are more than what they say about you." Taped below it, a tiny worn-down keychain from my first science fair. A little metal gavel that had come from a novelty store. I held it in my hand and laughed. Because, of course, even when he was gone, he was still giving me tools. Still leaving breadcrumbs toward the version of myself he always saw before anyone else did. Exams hit hard that semester. I pulled all-nighters, crashed on textbooks, drank more coffee than water. But I passed, and not just passed, excelled. Mark texted me after grades posted. "Told you were built for this." Rachel left a sticky note on my locker that read, "Keep walking forward. You already broke gravity." And me, I bought myself a gift. A framed print with 3 words on it. "Never sit down." A month later, I walked into the courtroom again, this time for an externship assignment. The judge presiding. The same one who ruled on my case. She didn't say anything when I entered. But when I handed her a file, she paused, looked up. "You're Winslow, right?" "Yes, Your Honor." A smile. "I remember your case." I waited. "You spoke with clarity," she said. "And restraint. That's rare." She didn't need to say more, but I walked out of that courtroom taller than when I walked in, because now I was the one helping write the rules. And I wasn't just building a career. I was building a life, one brick of truth at a time. Summer break arrived, but I didn't stop moving. While most students scattered to vacations or internships in corporate firms, I chose something different: pro bono work with a legal clinic for underrepresented youth. Kids aged 16 to 21 who were navigating guardianship issues, trust violations, or for who had simply been told they weren't worth the investment. I met Ava on the 3rd day. She was 17 in foster care since she was 9, and had just discovered her deceased grandmother left her a college fund, one that had been quietly emptied by a former legal guardian. When she came into my office, she didn't sit. She hovered by the chair like she was deciding whether I was safe. "I don't want charity," she said. "You're not getting it," I replied. "You're getting justice." She narrowed her eyes. "How do you know?" I handed her a piece of paper. the title. Winslow v. Winslow. Decision filed. She read it in silence. When she looked up, her expression had shifted, not softened. Focused. You sued your parents. I nodded. And you won. More than the case, I said. I won my future back. She sat down, and for the next hour we worked. That's when I realized every version of myself. The scared teenager, the trembling plaintiff, the broken kid hoping someone would believe him wasn't wasted. He was fuel. Ava's case took months, but we built it from the ground up, recovered digital bank logs, extracted text messages, found the missing statements the guardian swore never existed. And when the hearing date came, she walked in wearing a navy blazer 2 sizes too big and a look in her eyes that said, I'm not invisible anymore. She won, and I didn't celebrate with fireworks. Just a quiet nod from across the courtroom. She smiled. For the first time since I met her, that was enough. But peace has a rhythm. And just when you think you've mastered it, life taps you on the shoulder. One evening after clinic hours, I got a text from an unknown number. You never came back for the rest of your things. It was my father. 16 words. No apology. No question mark. Just a reminder that the past has claws and it scratches when you least expect it. I stared at the screen. I thought about the box of old trophies, yearbooks, childhood photos. Things that used to define me. And I realized I didn't need any of it. So I replied, keep them. Or don't. I've already moved forward. He didn't respond. And I didn't need him to. Later that week, a partner at the firm pulled me aside. We've been watching your work, she said. You've got a rare combination of technical skill and real-world experience. I waited. We want you to come on part-time during the school year. Focus on youth trust litigation. Maybe publish a paper. Are you in? I was quiet for a second. Not from hesitation, from awe. Because 5 years ago, I didn't even know if I'd afford my first semester. And now I was being offered a place in shaping the legal path I never knew existed. I'm in, I said. That night, I stood in front of my apartment mirror and stared at my reflection, not searching for flaws, just looking, seeing what had changed. I was leaner, stronger, still tired but sharper. My eyes didn't dart anymore. They met their own gaze. I whispered to myself, this is what survival looks like when it becomes power. Then I turned off the light and slept without dreams, without noise, just peace. My second year of law school began with something unfamiliar. Stability. No looming court dates. No fresh trauma sitting under my skin like a splinter. No waking up in the middle of the night wondering if I'd done the right thing. Just casebook schedules, coffee that tasted like academic ambition and purpose. I had purpose now. It showed in the way I raised my hand in class without hesitation. In how I dissected precedent, not from theory, but from lived experience. Professors noticed, so did students. One of them, Jake, approached me after class one day. You're the guy from that case, right? He asked. I froze for a moment. Depends which case. A Winslow v. Winslow. I didn't answer. Just waited. He didn't flinch. That took guts. Did it? I asked. Yeah, he said. Most people wouldn't go that far, even if they were right. I looked at him closely. Most people don't know what survival costs. He nodded quiet. Then, you ever think about teaching this stuff? Not just practicing law, but passing it on. That thought stayed with me. That semester, I started guest speaking in 1L ethics classes, not as an expert, just as someone who'd walked the fire line and lived to explain the smoke patterns. I built a presentation titled, When Justice Starts at Home, Navigating Personal Bias and Professional Integrity. I talked about what it's like to read through your own lawsuit in a textbook, about emotional distance, about objectivity when the law hits too close to home. I told them, you'll never forget your first personal conflict, but how you use it. That's where character is forged. And afterward, one of the students, a girl with red-rimmed eyes, stayed behind. My brother stole my student loans, she whispered. He forged my name. My parents say I'm being dramatic. I looked her straight in the eye. You're not dramatic. You're aware, and awareness is dangerous to people who benefit from your silence. She blinked, then smiled just a little. I gave her my number. My name began to circulate. Not just as the kid who sued his parents. That label was fading. Now it was the guy who helps people take their futures back. I wasn't doing it for attention. I wasn't building a brand. I was repairing, not just myself, but the broken pipeline that says silence equals peace. That family equals safety. That betrayal is easier than truth. And in repairing others, I noticed something. I was healing faster too. One night in late November, I got an email from the judge who ruled on my original case. It was brief. Saw your work in the Journal of Youth Law. Glad to see you didn't just win. You built from it. Good luck. We need more like you. I stared at the screen for a long time, then replied simply, "Thank you for believing me when no one else did." She never wrote back. She didn't need to. December came, and with it a voicemail. From my Aunt Laurel. I hadn't spoken to her since the lawsuit. Her voice was tight, hesitant. "Caleb, I heard what you've been doing. I want you to know I'm proud of you." I didn't understand at first. I do now. Your mom, she's not ready, but maybe one day. If she ever comes around, I hope you'll let her. I listened to it 3 times, then deleted it. Because forgiveness doesn't mean re-entry, and some doors, they need to stay closed. On the last day of the semester, I stood in front of my apartment mirror again, not looking for change. Recognizing it, my voice had settled into something steady. My posture, straight-backed, grounded. And my reflection, it no longer looked like someone who was trying to survive his story. It looked like someone writing new ones, for himself, and for anyone else brave enough to say, no more. Winter break passed in a quiet blur of outlines, clerkship applications, and late-night strategy calls with a few former clients who were now friends. I no longer measured my life by semesters or holidays. I measured it by who I could help next. One afternoon, while organizing my desk, I found something tucked between 2 books, a handwritten list from 3 years ago. Things I want to do if I ever get free. Go to law school, help someone like me, sleep through the night, be someone people can call for help, look in the mirror and not flinch. I smiled because I had done all 5, and not once, over and over again. In early January, a legal journal published my essay, "Blood is Not a Contract: Trust Violations in Family Law." It wasn't flashy, but it was honest. It dissected legal gray zones, areas where familial love is used as a smokescreen for control, where financial abuse hides beneath the language of sacrifice and "you owe us." I wrote, "The most dangerous thief is the one who says, 'I'm doing this for your own good,' while draining your future behind your back." The article circulated fast. One day later, a professor from Georgetown emailed me. He wanted to discuss bringing me in for a guest lecture. The following week, a podcast invited me on to talk about surviving legal abuse from inside the home. My initial instinct was to say no, not because I was afraid, but because part of me still felt like telling my story was reopening it. Then I remembered Ava and Sam and all the other quiet faces that had looked up at me and whispered, "Me too." So I said yes. The podcast went live on a Tuesday morning. By Friday night, my inbox had over 200 emails. Some were from law students, some from therapists, others from everyday people who had quietly endured family betrayals they'd never spoken aloud before. One message stood out. "I listened to your story in my car during lunch break. I didn't even know emotional damages were something I could fight for. I always thought it was just life being unfair. Thank you for giving people like me a name for the pain and a map out of it." I didn't reply. I didn't need to, because that message wasn't just for me. It was for who I used to be. Weeks later, during a quiet Saturday, I walked by the same courthouse where my trial had happened. I hadn't meant to go there. I was just out for air, but something pulled me toward it. The marble steps, the heavy wooden doors, the courtroom number etched in gold above the glass. Courtroom 3B. It was empty now. No echoes of my voice. No tight-lipped attorneys. No white-knuckled parents waiting to lie under oath. Just silence. I walked in anyway. Sat in the back row, closed my eyes, and imagined the boy I used to be sitting here, knees shaking, heart pounding, wondering if justice actually meant anything. He didn't believe it back then, but I wish he could see me now. On the way out, I passed a maintenance worker sweeping near the door. He glanced at me. "You look like you've been here before." I smiled faintly. "I have." "You win." I looked him in the eye and said, "Yeah, I did." He nodded. "Good. Not many do." I kept walking. But inside, something rose in my chest. Not pride. Peace. The kind you earn. The kind you build from broken pieces and courtroom whispers. The kind they tried to keep from me, but I took it back anyway. Spring semester brought new responsibilities, harder classes, longer nights, and a caseload at the clinic that had quietly doubled since the podcast aired. But none of it scared me anymore, because I knew what pressure felt like. And this wasn't pressure. It was purpose. One of my new clients, Julian, was 19 and halfway through community college when he learned his adoptive father had drained a government education grant tied to his name. When Julian tried to confront him and the man said, "It's all under the same roof, so it's the same money." Julian had grown up hearing that line. So had I. When he came to me, I could see the fear hiding beneath his defiance. That hollow space where trust used to live. "I want to go into architecture," he said, "but I can't even pay for next semester." I leaned in and said, "We'll make sure your future isn't something someone else can steal again." His hand stopped shaking. We got to work. That same week, I was invited to speak at a citywide youth advocacy summit. The topic, "When Family Betrayal Becomes Legal War." I stood on stage in front of 300 student social workers and nonprofit leaders, and I didn't flinch. I was 17 when I realized my parents had spent my entire college fund on luxury vacations. I began. I didn't get angry at first. I got quiet. And then I got dangerous because I learned the law. The room didn't move. They taught me silence was respect. But silence is also complicity. And I refused to be complicit in the erasure of my own future. I told them everything. The trust violations, the lawsuit, the victory, and most of all, the aftermath. Because winning doesn't mean it stops hurting. It just means you're no longer bleeding from it. After the speech, a woman in her 50s approached me. "You're the reason I'm helping my niece file an injunction against her father," she said. I nodded, not surprised anymore. This is what happens when you tell the truth out loud. People realize they're not crazy. At the end of that semester, the firm offered me a permanent part-time role with full mentorship. "You've earned it," Mark said. "Not because of your case, but because you never stopped fighting after it ended." He was right. The courtroom had been the beginning, not the climax. And just when I thought things had finally balanced, I received a message from my mom. No number, just an email. "Caleb, I heard your podcast. I didn't know how much I hurt you. I told myself it wasn't a big deal because we needed a break, and I convinced myself we'd make it up to you later. I realize now we never even said sorry. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know I'm sorry, Mom. No manipulation, no guilt, just sorry." I read it 3 times, then closed the tab. I didn't respond, not because I hated her, but because closure doesn't always need conversation. Sometimes the loudest healing is silence. Later that night, I stood on my fire escape watching the city breathe, and I thought, they tried to buy happiness with the price of my future, but I took that future back, brick by brick, law by law, truth by truth. And now I don't just fight for myself. I fight for every kid who's been told they owe their dreams to people who didn't earn them. Because that boy who sat in courtroom 3B, he grew up, he stood up, and he's still standing. Graduation came faster than I expected, not in the cliché time flies kind of way, but in that slow, persistent burn where one day you're crawling through trauma and the next you're walking across a stage diploma in hand, realizing you survived everything meant to bury you. NYU held the ceremony in a massive hall downtown. Robes, cameras, polite applause, the usual. But when they called my name, I didn't hear the crowd. I heard the silence of courtroom 3B. The sound of my parents' laughter when I first asked what happened to my college fund. The click of the judge's pen. The pounding of my heart the night I filed the lawsuit. And then, the thunder of my own footsteps across the stage moving forward anyway. I didn't look for them in the crowd. I didn't wonder if they watched online. I didn't care. Because that moment, that was mine. Unshared, unstolen, unbreakable. After the ceremony, the firm threw a small dinner. Mark raised a glass in a back room of a candlelit restaurant and said, "Most people enter law for power. Caleb entered because he understood pain. He knows the law can't undo betrayal, but he proved it can give someone the tools to rebuild after it." He turned to me. "You didn't just survive. You built something." I nodded, eyes tight. "I didn't have a choice," I said. "No," he replied, But you chose to turn survival into service. That's rare. A few weeks later, I started full-time at the firm. My title: Junior Associate Family and Trust Litigation Division. My job: helping people like Ava, Julian, and Sam. People who were told, this is just how families work. People who were guilted into silence. People who had their futures mortgaged by the very hands that were supposed to protect them. Every time I walked into a courtroom, I walked in for them, but also for the version of me that no longer had to sit quietly and wonder if he mattered. He did. He does. One rainy Friday night, I returned to that fire escape, the one I stood on after the court decision. Only this time, I wasn't shaking. I was smiling. Because I had a case in the morning, a real one. Court appearance, statement prep, a 17-year-old client who finally had enough evidence to face the aunt who drained her scholarship fund. And I knew exactly what I'd tell her before we walked into that room. They spent your future like it was theirs. But you get to take it back now, and I'll be there to make sure she does. This is the story of Caleb Winslow, a young man whose parents betrayed him in the most intimate, insidious way possible. By draining the college fund, his grandparents left him without telling him and spending it on themselves. What started as heartbreak turned into a legal battle that forced Caleb to confront the very people who raised him. With evidence, discipline, and the help of a few sharp legal minds, he didn't just file a lawsuit. He won it. More than just financial compensation, the court awarded him a voice, dignity, and the right to reclaim his path. But Caleb's journey didn't end in the courtroom. It continued in law school and advocacy, in mentoring other students robbed of their rights by the people who should have protected them. He went from the terrified plaintiff in courtroom 3B to a respected associate, helping clients fight trust violations and emotional abuse. Caleb's revenge wasn't loud. It was structured, clean, legal. He didn't destroy his parents. He outgrew them. And in doing so, he built a future that no one, not even those who tried, could ever steal again. So if you've ever been underestimated, ignored, or betrayed by someone you were told to love unconditionally, know this: you can take it back. And sometimes the best revenge is simply getting everything they said you'd never have. Subscribe to the channel to hear more true stories of quiet power, long memory, and perfect poetic justice.